Let's move into main topic number 4, shall we? And by the way, somebody was asking me where I got this sweatshirt. A very big thank you to my friend over at Warner Brothers for sending me this sweatshirt for the new upcoming Robert Pattinson Batman movie. I'm very excited about it. Anyway, let's move on to main topic number 4. And our 4th main topic today gets submitted to us by Aram V on the screens, who writes, "Okay, John, just being real with you." Uh-oh, here we go. "I have never understood your love of those horrible Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman movies. You don't need to understand it, man. It's all subjective. It's all good. But whatever. How can you still be interested in Zack Snyder Justice League?" By the way, guys, try not to send in abbreviations. It would just help me a lot. Anyway, how can you still be interested in Zack Snyder's Justice League? I know you saw it, but despite the fact that since 2017, you've been saying a Snyder edit was out there, but that a finished film wasn't, I keep seeing these Snyder sheep comment that John said a Snyder cut didn't exist. There's even some video someone made editing out all the parts where you specify you're talking about a finished film. How can you justify this movie when its ignorant followers act so stupid? All right. Thank you for sending that in, Aram. I appreciate that. But let me say this first. Within the last couple of years, the Zack Snyder Justice League cut movement, is there a bit of a toxic, poisonous overtone and underbelly to that group? Yes. But guess what? So does every fandom. You don't think Marvel has that? You're damn right Marvel has that. Rob, I remember there's a friend of mine who used to come on my show once in a while. She now works for really one of the big major trades. But there was a friend of mine back when the first Avengers movie came out, and she happened to be the first person to ever give a negative review to Avengers. And it's like, it's cool. You know me, I think it's the greatest comic book movie of all time. But it's like, oh, okay, so she didn't like it. She watched it, didn't work for her. Dude, she literally got death threats. She got some of the most misogynistic, hateful, poisonous stuff slewn at her. You don't think that part of fandom exists in the Harry Potter fandom? I got news for you. It does. You don't think that kind of part of fandom exists in the James Bond fandom? Rob, remember Craig not Bond? Craig not Bond. All that guy. Guess what? It does. You don't think it exists in Marvel? Guess what it does. So listen, if you're going to say I can't be a part of a fandom because there's a part of that fandom that doesn't act very nicely, well, then the problem is you're never going to be part of any fandom because every fandom's going to have it. The question is, are the majority of the people who are part of that fandom well-meaning, well-intentioned, you know, all that kind of stuff? And I would say that that's true of all of them. I think that's true of the Marvel fandom, of the DC fandom, of the James Bond fandom, of the Harry Potter fandom, of whatever the fandom is you want. I think that's true of most of them. So don't be put off by that, or else you're going to be put off from every single fandom. That being said, I don't care. I never have cared about criticism people have of me, because you're still talking about me. So I've never cared about criticism about me. It's one of the things Howard Stern, one of the great pieces of advice I ever got from Howard Stern. It's like, guess what? People can talk about how much they hate me, but they're talking about me. It's true. It is one of the things that has made me successful for over 10 years. So I don't mind that. But what does bother me, I will admit, what does bother me is being misrepresented. That bothers me. So I do want to address this quickly here. Over the past weekend, like over the past number of years, I get the odd message here and there. John said the Snyder Cut didn't exist. Like, that's fine. But over this past weekend, I got like 40 or 50 of those.
Yeah, me too.
Saying, John, remember you said the Snyder Cut doesn't exist. All right, let's visit that for a second. Shall we? Because you have to be a special kind of moron to believe I ever said an edit, that Snyder never had an edit of the movie. Because I always said that he did. When you go back to 2017, Rob, the very first time, it was an episode of the John Campea show when you go back to 2017 in the very first John Campea show that I ever specifically talked about Snyder Cut, it was the first time ever. In that video, I made it very clear. Zack Snyder, before he left or was let go or whichever semantics you want to use, Zack Snyder, before leaving the project, had an edit of the film that was about 4 hours long that he sat down and showed to the Warner Brothers executives. And by the way, Matthias 1689 sends in a super chat badge in the live chat. Thank you for that, man. I appreciate that. So I said in the very first time I ever talked about Snyder Cut stuff is that Snyder has an edit. He showed it to the WB executives, but there seems to be some confusion out there that there are a bunch of people that seem to think that there is a completed, finished film. And that, I said, does not exist. A finished, completed version of Snyder Cut didn't exist. But I said in 2017, he has an edit, he showed it to the Warner Brothers, but a completed finished film doesn't exist. In 2018, I said there is an edit, but it's not a completed finished film that could just be released tomorrow. And in 2019 and in 2020 and in 2021, I always said the same thing. Of course, Snyder has an edit. He showed it to the Warner Brothers executives. But that is not a finished, completed film. A finished, completed Snyder Cut did not exist. And it didn't exist. It never did. As a matter of fact, if you go and listen to the chairman, the day they announced, this is an important date, guys. Remember this date, May 20th, 2020. On that day, they made the announcement that they were going to put the Snyder Cut Justice League on HBO Max. And the chairman of Warner Media, he's not there anymore, but the guy who is the chairman of Warner Media, Robert Greenblatt, he said this: "It isn't as easy as going into the vault and there's a Snyder Cut just sitting there to put out. It does not exist. Zack is actually building it. And it's complex, including new visual effects shots. It's a radical rethinking of that movie, and it's complicated and wildly expensive. I'll just say, I wish it was just $30 million and stop there. It's an enormous undertaking and very complex." And by the way, V13 sends in a super chat badge in the live chat. Thanks for that, man. I was just say, I wish it was $30 million. We now know, Rob, it was closer to $70 million they spent to actually make the Snyder Cut. It's an enormous undertaking and very complex. And that was Robert Greenblatt, chairman of Warner Media. And by the way, he is no longer the chairman of Warner Media. And there is rumors out there, Rob, that the reason that Robert is no longer the chairman of Warner Media was because he greenlit this thing and gave them $70+ million to finish it. But that's just a rumor. Take that. That's neither here nor there. So I said from the beginning, 2017, first video I ever did on Snyder Cut, I said there is an edit, there's not a completed film. The chairman of Warner Media, on the day they announced they were going to release Snyder Cut on HBO Max, confirmed that as of then, a completed Snyder Cut movie never existed. But still, I would have people coming to me and say, "But John, you said that a Snyder Cut just didn't exist at all." Really? Okay. Let's take a second here. Let's take a second. Let's go back and look at 2017, the first time I ever talked about Snyder Cut, 2018, 2019, and the things I said consistently. Take a look at this for a minute. There seems to be this assumption in the petition that a completed, finished Zack Snyder cut of Justice League exists. It does not. I'm going to tell you right now, it does not. Is it true that there was a first cut and that they previewed the first cut for the WB execs 6 months ago? Yes. But if you think Justice League was then done 6 months ago, I hate to break it to you, but no, it wasn't. There was a cut. Let's be honest here. Regardless of whether or not I don't believe a Snyder Cut exists, but by Snyder Cut, I don't just mean the footage was shot and Zack Snyder edited it together, but there's no post-production work. I mean a true completed version of a Snyder Cut version of Justice League, sound mixing and editing, color correction, all the visual effects, everything that needs to be done. The full the post-production process is finished. A truly completed, finished version of the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. I don't believe it exists. What is the Snyder Cut? Okay. The Snyder Cut, Rob, is, as you and I both know, is a cut of the movie that, because Zack Snyder had shot a whole ton of stuff, and he had cut a version of all the stuff he had together as the Snyder Cut. The Snyder Cut, understanding it is an unfinished assembly of the movie from start to finish, and he's got his cut of the film. He does have a version of the film. Such a thing exists. The Snyder Cut is a cut of the film of all the footage and whatever was finished at the time and put together that Zack Snyder has, and this is his cut of the film. No one has ever denied the existence of that. But what the Snyder Cut is not, and what a lot of people have confused, the Snyder Cut is not a ready to be released, 100% post-production, color corrected, audio engineered, soundtrack laid, visual effects 100% complete, blah, blah, basically a finished version of the film that is ready to be released in theaters right now. That does not exist. So I've been saying the whole time, since the very first time I talked about Snyder Cut in 2017, first video I ever did of it, there's a cut of the movie, he showed it to Warner Brothers, but a completed, finished version does not exist. And then, Rob, what I would get is a bunch of people would come to me and say, well, John, nobody really thinks a finished version exists. Nobody really thinks that. Bullshit. Because every single time I would bring up over the past 3.5 years that, guys, yeah, Snyder has an edit of the film, but it's not a completed film ready to be released. Every single time I would get hundreds and hundreds of people calling me an idiot, saying, yes, it did exist. Yes, it does exist. It's completed. It's finished. For example, this morning, 5 minutes before we started the show, Rob, I hopped on Twitter and I just picked a random tweet I put out. A random tweet I put out in 2019 where I just said, hey guys, I keep seeing there's some confusion about this. There is no completed, ready to go, ready to be released version of Snyder Cut. He's got an edit. You should be asking Warner Brothers to finish the Snyder Cut and then release it, right? This is what I got. This is just pulled from, these are just some responses from that one tweet I did, Rob, saying everything from, there is a finished cut and it is complete. You are in serious denial. John, it is sitting on a shelf because it's done and you don't do your research. John, Momoa said he saw the finished cut with all the effects done. John, from what I've read, it is finished. Also writing, you're only saying that it's not finished because it's Zack Snyder. Snyder has confirmed that the Snyder Cut is confirmed and dead. This is just from one tweet I put out. So don't tell me, oh, John, nobody actually really thought it was done. Oh, yeah, they did. They just started pretending like they weren't insisting it was already done. Once May 20th, 2020 came and they opened up the doors and it got revealed, John was right. He had an edit, but it wasn't finished. And it was so unfinished, that they needed $70 million to complete it. They needed $70 million to complete it. So while I don't care about criticism and all things like that, it does get under my skin a bit, I will admit, and nothing should get under my skin, but I will admit it does get under my skin when what I said is being misrepresented. By the way, Jojo Ponce sends in a super chat badge. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. It bothers me when I'm misrepresented. When there are some clowns out there trying to push a narrative that John said that a Snyder Cut just didn't exist. Again, go back to my very first video ever about this. I said there was an edit. He showed it to Warner Brothers, but there's not a completed film. You have to be a special kind of stupid. You have to be a special kind of stupid to think that I ever said, just in general, a Snyder Cut didn't exist. Now, some might say, and this is where we get into interesting discussion, Some might then say, well, John, you said back in 2018, you said they never would release it. Okay, all right, let's talk about that. Did I say back in 2018, and even for parts of 2019, that they never would release it? I did. I did say that. And guess who agreed with me, Rob? Deborah Snyder agreed with me. Because this is Deborah Snyder on May 20th, 2020, the day they announced that the Snyder Cut was coming, but it was coming to HBO Max and only HBO Max. And she said the following: with the new platform, that's HBO Max, and streaming services, you can have something like this, the Snyder Cut. You can't release something like this theatrically. That's not me saying that. That's Deborah Snyder saying that. She said, you cannot release something like this theatrically, but you could go on a streaming service. It is an opportunity that just wasn't there 2 years ago, to be honest. That comes to us from Deborah Snyder. And by the way, Marcus sends in a super chat badge in live chat. Thank you, Marcus. So I did say for a time that they'll never release this. They'll never release this. And Deborah Snyder agrees. It never would have been released. Were it not for HBO Max, this never would have been released. Okay, let's talk about HBO Max for a second, Rob. Let's talk about HBO Max for a second. On May 20th, 2020, they announced that they were going to actually finish and actually do the Snyder Cut and put it on HBO Max. But on January of 2020 and in March of 2020, 4 months before they ever announced it was coming to HBO Max, and 2 months before it was ever coming to HBO Max, Rob, you and I did videos where we said, you know what? Now that HBO Max is here, they should put this out on HBO Max. This was 4 months and 2 months before they ever made the announcement. And we said, so I went from saying they're never going to release this, and Deborah Snyder agrees with me, to, you know what? HBO Max is here now. They should put this thing out on HBO Max. They should totally put this out on HBO Max, and I think they will. Now, Rob, the one thing that I got wrong about this, and I've admitted it, and you got right, by the way. I got this part wrong, and you got this part right. The one part I got wrong about this was in saying that I think they should release this on HBO Max and that I think they will release it on HBO Max. I said, I don't think they'll put any money into it. I said, I think they'll just take it and release it as it is. And according to Zack Snyder, they did discuss that at one point. And he refused, and good for him for refusing that. But I thought they would just release it without putting any extra money into it. You, on the other hand, Rob, you said from day one when we talked about the HBO thing, you said you think they will put money into it. And you, sir, I give that to you. You were right. I was wrong on that part. They did put more money into it. They did put extra money into it. So there's that. And it's great. And there was joy amongst all the people. But at any rate, look, we can agree and disagree about movies. That's great. We're all going to have massively different opinions about movies. It just bothers me when somebody so blatantly and so obviously and so egregiously and purposefully misrepresents what I actually said. And I, Rob, couldn't have been any more clear. You and I both could not have been any more clear. We had always said from the first day we talked about it, the cut exists, but this finished movie doesn't. And we got tons of pushback from people whenever we said it, saying it did exist. And we kept saying, no, it doesn't. And we were right. And you want to argue about my opinions on certain things and whatever, we can do that all day. And that's good. Those are good discussions to have. Just don't purposefully, egregiously, deceptively misrepresent what it is I actually said, because that, I will admit, bothers me. And I think it would bother anybody. Anyway, Rob, you know, this has been a whole topic because, you know, you and I both for years have like talked to each other about, look at these clowns, these messages we're getting from people like insisting that the movie's done and blah, 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 and calling us names for saying that it's not. Anyway, now that we finally come to the end of this long road, your take on this whole journey, this almost like epic journey we've been on here. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, you know, a lot of my frustration with all of this was that I was kind of thinking about it from an industry perspective, in the sense that what fascinated me the most working in post-production myself is obviously there was a cut. There's always a cut of a movie when people start shooting because you're working on it from the second day of production when you got your footage in. And on large budget effects features like this, they have previs they can start cutting together. But the idea is when I think people's lack of understanding about the process was frustrating about this. And also, you know, Justice League was completed and released, and there are actors, for instance, that are in this version of the movie that were not in the finished version of Justice League. So there's actual contracts, SAG contracts and other contracts that would have to be renegotiated. And there's just a lot of, from an industry perspective, things that would have to have happened for this to occur. And so I was always kind of thinking about it from that perspective. And it was frustrating trying to speak to people from an industry perspective that would just dismiss it. And like you said, I even said back in my own show, because somebody wrote in and told me this, that back in November of 2019, I was all like, you know what? I was talking about HBO Max, and I said, they could make this happen because there's nobody at Warner Brothers. Where'd the money come from? You can't just put money into something. You know, a studio can't just decide, well, let's throw millions of dollars in to finish this movie that we've already finished. It's like, where would that, like anything else, where's the budget come from? You know, studios just can't. So that was the big thing for me, was who's going to pay for this and how are they going to get remunerated in some way for putting up that money? Because a studio can't just spend money on something. And so, you know, I think that was where I was coming from. And it was frustrating to try and explain from an industry perspective and a filmmaking perspective what was going on. But what I think is so great about this is that HBO Max did step up. And it's something that they saw immediately. The new regime at Warner Brothers, they didn't have any connection to the first regime, or for them, it's like, hey, we're the new guys in town. Wouldn't this be cool if people want it? And it was a perfect storm that happened, something I never saw. I didn't foresee HBO Max coming into play here, and it has, and they paid for it. And people have to remember, Deborah Snyder herself, dude, 2,600 visual effects needed to be finished in this thing. 2,600. There were only 300 visual effects in Tenet. That's an incredible amount of visual effects that needed to be finished. This movie was so far away from being in a format that could ever be shown, more than I even thought. After hearing about what happened, the Snyder Cut as it existed was way far away from being able to be released. And Zack himself said, like you pointed out, there was discussions of releasing what existed. And Zack said, there's no way. I would never release something that's unfinished, because when people criticized it, you'd be able to point at me and go, see, this Snyder Cut isn't so great, because it wouldn't have been done. It wasn't ready to go. So I think everybody should just be happy. Look, we discussed it for 4 years. Now it exists. And dude, I know you've seen it.
It's good.
It's good. And I cannot wait.
Yeah, and listen,
I cannot wait.
I gotta say too, you know, there was a long period of time, like I am a fan of Snyder's. He's only ever made one movie that I don't like, and that was Sucker Punch. I've liked all of his DC stuff. I particularly, obviously, Man of Steel. I mean, it's one of the greatest of all time. I love Batman versus Superman, all that kind of stuff. But I never really thought there was a point to it. To be honest with you, I never thought there was a point to releasing it until maybe around mid 2019, maybe the beginning of 2020, just because there's so many people who wanted to see it. It's like, whatever. But I gotta say, man, it's better than I thought it would be. Yeah. And again, it doesn't capture Man of Steel level excellence, but that's a super, super really high bar. The one thing I will say about it right now is that it suffers from the same thing that the Batman versus Superman Ultimate Cut suffered from, because I think the Ultimate Cut was a bit better than the theatrical cut of Batman versus Superman.
Oh yeah.
But it was also a little bit over bloated. It was longer than it needed to be, and I felt a little bit of that in this Justice League, although like the Ultimate Cut, it is better than the theatrical version. I think even better than Batman versus Superman. So, but it's all subjective. It's going to be up to everybody's own individual opinions. But again, right now, it's got the highest critic rating that any Zack Snyder DC movie's ever had. And I think that says something. Anyway, That's it for now, guys. We're all done with that stuff. Let's now move on to start taking your live comments and questions, shall we? And